Meet Reid Lance Rosenthal, rancher, #1 best-selling award-winning author, and unabashedly, unapologetically on the right side of the outstanding issues of our generation. But don't try to fence him in. Sometimes his positions will surprise you, because Reid is definitely his own man, with his own opinions. You might love him, you might hate him, but you won't be able to stop listening. Step over to the right side with Reid.
Happy Saturday. This is Reid Lance Rosenthal on the Right Side Radio, broadcasting to you at a KGAB AM 650 on your dial Cheyenne and the Town Square Network, serving the Intermountain West, and 780 AM Denver, and, of course, Easy. That's right. KFEZ, Easy, Colorado Springs, Southern Colorado, and northern New Mexico. Hello, Rocky Mountains, from Utah to Nebraska and Montana to New Mexico. You know, that show I did last week, Connect the Dots, that got the biggest response, other than my interview with George Euclix, of any of my shows this year. In fact, for the last 6 months, other than some of the national interviews. I mean, my email box was crowded. We had just a phenomenal number of hits on the website, on the rightsideradio.com. And I got into all sorts of, shall we say, spirited written tussles with folks who don't quite think like I do on Facebook, the Huffington Post, and a whole bunch of other places. Pretty amazing. And so I thought, based on some of the comments I received, which was, and this was, by the way, from folks who don't think like most of you do and like I do. But let's see, the complaints were, there were just too many facts to check. That tells me that some of the libs that listen to this show, and by the way, I like you listening to this show. Please keep listening. But some of the libs that listen to this show and did some fact checking, they checked some facts and they all checked out. They just didn't have time to check them all since it was fact-loaded. And the other complaint I got from Sally and Aurora was, all this is old news. Okay, Sally, I'm sure you've heard all that news that I had in that last show 100 times. I don't think so. But I heard that from several people. Well, you just picked things that were, 4 years ago and 2 years ago and 20 years ago. So I'll tell you what I'm going to do. This show, we're just going to hit the same kind of thought process. I'm going to give you facts. I'm going to let you connect the dots. It's going to be along the lines of last week's show, but this is all in the last 60 days. In fact, a lot of what I'm going to talk about is in the last week. You'll recognize this stuff. And we're going to do international, because there's some amazing international things happening which you have not heard about, which affect you, and I mean affect you and your family today, and will affect you more so in the future. We're then going to talk about some scary stuff about the New World Order, pronounced and enunciated by none other than Joe Biden. And we're going to talk about your kids, the plans they have for your kids. You're going to think I'm making it up, but I'm going to give you the actual quotes, and you can check it out on Google. And then I'm going to tie it into a name that you know from long ago who said the same things. Then we're going to go to the DHS, their purchase of 2 billion rounds of ammo, 2,700 armored vehicles, and a host of other things I didn't get to talk about last night, like bulletproof checkpoint stations, hundreds of them. Wow. 7,000 automatic assault rifles, the same ones that they want to ban from you owning. Imagine that. And then, folks, we're going to talk about Colorado. Okay? I know a lot of my listeners are in Colorado, and I'm going to throw out some things that you just A, haven't thought about, and B, haven't heard, because you are so being used. Your state is so being used by Washington and by the puppets that unfortunately you have allowed to get control of your state government, who are really just kind of extensions of Washington policy. So I'm going to give you some behind-the-scenes fact on what's been going on in your state and with your sheriffs and how important they are. And I think it'll be an eye-opener for you. You probably don't know your governor signed a bill that kind of circumvents the sheriffs and allows the president's Secret Service to do their job. Oh, I'm going to tell you about it. You bet. Then, from there, we're going to go into gun control. And I have a host of things that you haven't heard before on gun control. Once again, you know the rest of the story. And it's kind of funny how this gun control ties into this DHS ammo purchase. I mean, all these things are interrelated, folks. You're going to see as I go through it. And then finally, I'm gonna wind up the show with some domestic economic facts. I guarantee you haven't heard them, and I guarantee they will set your hair on fire. And then I'm going to tell you where all that's leading, because it's all leading to your pocket or your property or both. And I'm going to just give you facts today, just like last week. You check them out. Please do. You Google them up. Write down the names, whatever you want to do. On last week's show in the archives, if you haven't heard it, may I suggest that you listen, because it's an absolutely terrific foundation. It's kind of the past 20 years, all facts, you connect the dots, and this show is the last 60 days, all facts, you connect the dots. The two put together gives you quite a picture over the 2 or 3 decades as, shall we say, bad things have happened and they're getting worse. Once again, I'm gonna really try hard, and I think I did a decent job last week. In fact, even the liberal letters I got, nobody faulted me for voicing opinion. So I'm going to stick to facts. I'm going to ask you a few questions to ask yourself. I'm not going to give you the answers. I think we're past that. You know, we're all grown-ups. I think you're grown up enough to come up with these answers yourself and act accordingly. And whatever your decision is, whatever your ideology is out there in listener land, that's okay. I'm just asking you to be informed when you make that final decision of what you're going to do for you, your family, your children's children, and your country. And in the case of Colorado, your state. Now, I'm going to get started not with a bunch of facts, but I'm going to get started by asking you some questions. So think about this. If your child came to you and lied about something, you know, no, Mom, I wasn't over at Sally's house, but she or he was. Or, no, Mom, I didn't drink beer at the party, but you heard that they did. If they continued that pattern of lies to you, you know, not just once, not just a fib, not just like a little, shall we say, distortion of the truth, what would you think about your child? Would you have some doubts about what they told you? What if your employer said, you know, I promise you a raise next month? Or, I'm going to give you 50 cents a mile for the car. I mean, whatever it is. And that happened 3 or 4 times, and then it didn't happen, or you did the opposite. Instead of getting a raise, you got your pay cut. Now, in these times, you might not quit. I mean, personally, I would. But you might not quit because jobs are hard to come by and you got a family to feed. What happened to your trust quotient in that employer? How about if you are an employer, you folks out there who are entrepreneurs or managers at a big company, and one of your employees lies about being late, lies about the work they have done, looks you in the eye and says, Joe did the report. I didn't know I was supposed to do it, when you have the email in your inbox giving them the directions to do it and their acknowledgement of getting the email and saying they'd get it done. What would you do? You'd probably fire them, wouldn't you? Okay. Think about that. How do you handle liars in your life? I know how I handle them. I don't believe them anymore. I try not to deal with them. if they're loved ones, it makes it much tougher. But, once that trust is broken, it's hard to reestablish. In fact, sometimes impossible. So, let's look at our President, Barack Obama. And now, from here on in, folks, it's just facts. Just the facts, as Sergeant Friday would say, and the rest of the story, as Paul Harvey would say. Mr. Obama has, and you've heard him 100 times, you can Google it up and you can listen to 2 hours of video, talked about how the sequester was the Republicans' idea and it's all their fault and it was really stupid and this and that and the other. Except we know that's not the truth, right? The sequester was President Obama's idea. Bob Woodward, Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, this is the guy who exposed Watergate. Here's his quote, and he interviewed people in the White House. Quote, Obama personally approved of the plan for Lew and Neighbors to propose a sequester to Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid. Neighbors has told others that they check with the president before going to see Reid, unquote. To continue, after reviewing all the interviews and the extensive material I have on this issue, it looks like President Obama told a whopper. This is what Woodward says, and this is last October. Quote, based on what Jack Lew said in Florida on October 25th, I have asked the White House to correct the record, end quote. Senate Finance Committee Chairman Max Baucus, he's a Democrat, folks, a staunch supporter of the president, the architect of Obamacare, said, quote, the president is part of the sequester, end quote. The White House recommended it, frankly, end quote. Even the press secretary for Mr. Obama, Jay Carney, he said, because he was just getting barraged after Woodward and Baucus came out, I quote, the sequester was something that was discussed. It was an idea that the White House put forward, end quote. Let's go to another little point. You all saw President Obama stand up there in front of the American people time and time again. You Google it up, folks. Once again, you can watch 2 hours of videos. We're going to be fair and we're going to be balanced. And what I propose isn't going to cost anybody making under $250,000 a year one dime. Not one dime. Not payroll tax. Not income tax. Not Social Security tax. I mean, listen to the video. Not one dime. Everybody who gets a paycheck knows that it's less starting that first pay period in January of this year. Everybody knows that in Obamacare, out of the $675 billion in new taxes, please go check it out, 13 of the 21 taxes directly or indirectly, yeah, and in the end, folks, direct or indirect, it's money out of your pocket, directly or indirectly affect the middle class, people making under $250,000 a year, and in most cases much less. And the tax hikes, $600 billion give or take, that were put into place over and above the Obamacare taxes also affect the middle class. In fact, folks, they mostly affect the middle class in one way, shape, or form, including an increase in capital gains tax. You know, when you sell your house, that's capital gains. When you sell your stocks, that's capital gains. When you take the gains out of your retirement plans, it's capital gains. Okay, let's go to another one. I think we're all familiar with Benghazi. Now, wherever you stand on the Benghazi issue, I think we can all agree that Susan Rice was sent by the White House because Hillary Clinton refused to go. And despite an entirely different story being told in subsequent testimony by the State Department, the Department of Defense, and the CIA. At the White House bequests on 5 Sunday talk shows, she said it was a mob. It wasn't planned, blah, blah, blah. I think we all know that it took 5 months, give or take, for Hillary Clinton to testify. And I think we're all familiar with her famous line when questioned about the 4 Americans that died there. What difference does it make, actually, is the exact line. What difference does it make? You don't believe me, folks? Google it up. Watch the video. Watch your Secretary of State, part of President Obama's cabinet, acting at the request of the President, talk about 4 American deaths, people serving this country, and say in response to questions concerning their death, what difference does it make? Unfortunately, it doesn't end there. Obama, in talking about gun control here in the last week, once again, Google it up, please watch the video. He talks about, in a beseeching voice, brown eyes earnestly looking into the camera, if it saves just one life, there's no excuse not to do it. I would point out, and this is a fact, that 4 lives were lost in Benghazi. That the survivors have not yet been allowed to testify, even though 6 months have passed. That 700 special ops people have signed a letter to the president, please Google it up, wanting to know what the hell's going on, because these people were trained in it. They say the assets were available and that assets could have been there in a very short period of time, long before the 8-hour firefight was over, and long before the 2 Navy SEALs lost their lives in the last hour of that fight. This will be the last one. President Obama came out with his budget this week. I'm not going to bore you with all the mainstream media stuff. That's not what I do. I will tell you that you can look at it for yourself. It's online. And forget all the BS. Forget him standing up there and telling you, once again, Google it up, that it saves $2.5 trillion, that it lowers the deficit by $2.5 trillion, that it does this and that it does that and that it does the other. At the end of the budget period, they have totals on that budget. Go look at it. And if your math is the same as mine, you'll see that the money going out over the term of the budget is $5 trillion more than the money coming in. And that includes $1 trillion in new tax hikes, almost all of which will hit the middle class. And I'm talking about people who make as little as $30,000 or $40,000 a year, folks. There's increases in taxes on utilities, which we all pay. On gasoline, which we all pay. On cigarettes, which some of us pay. And on many other items which affect a large proportion of the population or all of us. Remember, folks out there, I told you a year ago, don't be cheering about these increased taxes on the quote-unquote millionaires and billionaires because you were next. Well, you're next. Batter up. The point of this opening is to kind of set the stage for what we're going to go over here for the rest of this show. Because the president is your kid that I asked you a question about. He's your boss, I asked you a question about. He's your employee, I asked you a question about. My question to you at the end of this little, shall we say, mini segment is, what does it take for you to understand that the President of the United States often does not tell the truth and is aware of the fact when he opens his mouth? I gave you 5 examples. I could have given you 100. You're familiar with all of them. Google them up. Watch his lips move in a video. Let's move to the next thing. Let's go to international. And by the way, to lead into international, what would you think of a good friend of yours, an employee of yours, an employer of yours, or a relative of yours who knew that your security was in danger, yet failed to warn you of the danger, or worse yet, downplayed the danger and said it didn't exist? For those of you who are curious, you can go to Google and you can Google up North Korea nuclear capabilities. Don't look at the articles from the last 2 days. Look at them for the last year, where our government is telling us, oh, that North Korea, that little pipsqueak nation, that little mouse that can't roar, we don't have to worry about them. They don't have a nuclear weapon that they can put on a missile. They don't have the technology. Gee, what did we learn? What did we learn just 2 days ago? Yeah, they do have the technology to put a nuclear warhead on a missile. And not only that, our government has known about it for some time. So if our government, which is run by, it's a fact, folks, the chief executive officer, whose name is Barack Obama, would lie to us about these other things, but most importantly, about something that affects our physical safety and life, what else would they lie to us about? That's my question to you. What else would they lie to us about? And question number 2 is, can you really believe anything that they or he tells you? Is there a hidden agenda to everything they tell you? Those are my 3 questions. Now, international. You haven't heard much about Europe, have you, other than the meltdown in Cyprus, and which culminated, as you probably know, or maybe you don't, in 40 cents on the dollar, give or take, being taken out of all accounts, just skimmed right off the top by the Cypriot government under orders from the European Central Bank. Remember that interview with George Euclid's Hi Mucky Muck in the European Central Bank 2 or 3 weeks ago. Listen to it on the archives. You know, other than that, you really haven't heard anything, and that's been kind of hush-hush. You know, oh, that really didn't happen. Oh, that's just a little island with 1 million people. I mean, you can Google up what the mainstream media said. Well, let me tell you some other things that are happening in Europe which are going to affect us, and I've been beating this drum for 1.5 years, 2 years, actually. What you probably didn't know is that at the end of February and going into March, Italy started to melt down again. I mean, they've been in a process of meltdown for more than a year. Done shows on it. And they're one of the pigs: Portugal, Italy, Greece, and Spain. The southern European countries that the northern European countries pretty much support. Excuse me. So Italy, which is not like Cyprus, which is a small island, Italy is the 3rd largest economy of the Eurozone. It ranks 8th in the world in terms of economies. And they had an election, and it was like the worst case election you can imagine for investors and bondholders. The bottom line is that, should we say, the person that was elected doesn't believe in austerity. doesn't want to go along with the edicts of the European Central Bank and the European Common Market. What's even worse is that it was almost a dead tie between the two parties, and in Italy, the two, shall we say, houses of parliament are almost equal in power. It's a little bit different, quite a bit different actually than the United States system. So we have a country now that has balked at going forward with getting its economy straightened out and its debt down and shoring up its banks, and a government that is paralyzed. Not a really good combination. Also, you haven't heard about France. France has been unable to meet its deficit target. It's going to extend what they call it the living with less situation. That's what the French call it, living with less. Other countries call it austerity. We call it sequester. They call it living with less. So France is in trouble. Then we have Portugal. Wow. I know you haven't heard about this. This you really got to kind of watch the money news to have found out, because they don't want to talk about it. Portugal, one of the pigs, was actually doing quite well. They were doing the best, in fact. They were the most tenacious in following. They have a conservative government. They were the most tenacious in following the cutback government, stop spending, start balancing your budget, and meeting the guidelines of the European Common Market and the European Central Bank so they continue to get funding. They had to cut like another 1.6 plus or minus billion euros. Euros are roughly, guys, about $1.30 to $1. So, we're talking about $2.5 billion. Remember, Portugal is not a big economy. To meet their targets for the European Central Bank to continue to get their funding. And there was a court case. And the court in Portugal said that some of the austerity measures that this conservative government was trying to put in were unconstitutional. One of the measures, by the way, which the Portuguese Supreme Court, or the equivalent to our Supreme Court, said was unconstitutional, I'm not making this up, is that government workers who in Portugal have been paid for decades for 14 months of work every year. Let me repeat that. They've been paid 14 months of work every year for a 12-month year. One of the ways 1 billion of the 1.6 billion euros was going to be raised by simply cutting their pay to 12 months of pay for 12 months of work. The Portuguese Supreme Court said that was unconstitutional. So suddenly, Portugal is in a fix. So we have Spain. Spain is not doing well either, but we have Italy, we have France, and we have Portugal, all in a pickle, all at once, and you're not hearing about it. But you will. And by the way, although not Europe, it's certainly in line with this, shall we say, set of facts, all of which are in the last the last 2 to 30 days. Those of you out there who said, oh, all your stuff was old, it was ancient, it was dusty, it was prehistoric. I mean, what pterodactyl did you fly in on? On the last 30 days, folks. Interesting, huh? Which is kind of a good segue into Colorado. That's right, Colorado. What you probably don't know about your gun laws down there, and you folks can Google this up, is that Vice President Biden twisted arms prior to the vote on your gun control laws. He called four of your legislatures who are in moderate districts, in other words, swing districts, and basically told them that if they went with the gun control proposal, they would have Democratic support from the national level, and if they didn't, the national level would make sure that they would face primary opponents. And by the way, I will. You have one of your state reps down there, Carol Murray. She's a Republican. She talked about this. She talked about East Coast politics kind of invading and corrupting your state. The bottom line of all this is that you aren't running your state, folks. In fact, your legislature is not running your state. Washington, D.C. is running your state. That's why you've had the pleasure of Mr. Obama's visits and the scurrilous behind-the-scenes manipulation of your elected representatives by Washington, D.C., both direct and indirect, via phone call and in person, replete with threats. Now, what a lot of you probably don't know is that there's a new bill that your governor, Mr. Hickenlooper, this is another guy who really kind of needs to go away in the next election. Because, you know, all of you either work at your own company, or you've worked at companies, or you're an employee right now. And, you know, corporate culture comes from the top, right? I mean, the top 1 or 2 or 3 people in a company kind of set the tone. They set the attitude. They set the boundaries of a company. Wouldn't you agree? You entrepreneurs who are listening to this show, wouldn't you say that in your world you set the tone for your company? Well, your governor sets the tone for your state. And the tone's not pleasant. You have a new bill. It's called SB 13-013. It was passed on nearly a party line vote. This is just in the last week or two, folks. And this bill, which was ramrodded by the governor and the Democrats, which control your life at the ends of the puppet string from Washington. If you don't think Washington has been pulling the strings of your legislatures, Google it up. But this particular bill you'll really dislike because, you know, the only thing that kind of stands between you and a government run amok are your sheriffs. And your sheriffs are elected citizens who take an oath to uphold the Constitution, both of the state and of the country. Whereas appointed law officers and appointed bureaucrats don't necessarily have to do that. Nor do they have to answer to a constituent. They merely answer to their boss who sets the corporate culture. So here's the text. Here's just a portion of the text of the bill. I think you'll kind of get where they're going. And it's obviously in direct response to your sheriff standing up and saying, these gun control laws will A, do nothing, B, are illegal because they're unconstitutional, and C, we won't enforce them. So here's the response of your Colorado government, folks. Here's some text. The Secret Service agent, they're talking about the Secret Service of the United States. You know, the guys who guard the president? The Secret Service agent acts in accordance with the rules and regulations of his or her employing agency. A Secret Service agent is a person who is employed by the United States government, assigned to the United States Secret Service, empowered to effect an arrest with or without a warrant for violations of the United States Code, and authorized to carry a firearm and use deadly force in the performance of his or her duties as a federal law enforcement officer. Wow. You know, one of your senators, Kevin Lundberg, He's a Republican out of Berthoud. He understands what the deal is. Basically, and I quote him, and he's right, unlike the state's law enforcement, the Secret Service would not have any jurisdictional concerns. Remember, your sheriffs can't go out of their county. Under this bill, they can go anywhere in the state of Colorado regardless of jurisdiction. Another of your representatives, Lori Sain, she's a Republican out of Dacono. Quote, this is absolutely insane. In theory, if a Secret Service agent is in a county where the sheriff has refused to enforce some of the recent unenforceable gun laws, the agent could arrest an individual if he believes the law has been broken. Well, look, Thomas Jefferson once said, folks, this is a fact too, please check it out. Quote, timid men prefer the calm of despotism to the tempestuous sea of liberty. Think about that. And think about your sheriffs, because your sheriffs are critical. Your sheriffs, by the way, are standing up to this nonsense. In fact, over half of your sheriffs are filing suit or have filed suit. Even the Denver Post reported it. Good for you, Denver Post. 37 of your 62 elected sheriffs are kind of co-plaintiffs on your behalf, on behalf of the people of the state of Colorado. Because nobody else is looking out for you. I mean, I guarantee you, nobody else is looking out for you. And hopefully they'll be able to get some of this nonsense overturned. But they really, really, really need your support, folks. They really are, in that state right now, your last line of defense. And you need to get organized, because you got an election coming in 2014. All right. That ends our little segment on Colorado. Let's talk about your kids. I think most of you probably saw the uproar and furor. Maybe you didn't. But you had this extreme kind of left-wing commentator on NBC. And in the last week, she came out with this thing, shall we say, this spiel, which on one hand supported abortion. I'm not going to go into what I think about abortion or whether abortion's good, bad, or indifferent. Not the point of this show. But she called an embryo a thing, which I thought was rather interesting. You can listen to the video. Go to YouTube, check it out. But she also said that children don't belong to parents. They belong to the community. And they should be raised by the collective. I'm paraphrasing. Please, go listen to it. I mean, my mouth dropped open. I think yours will too. At the same time she was talking about that, and ask yourself a question, are there any coincidences? Joe Biden was talking about, and he was at a banking conference this a week ago Friday. He called for, and I quote, the creation of a new world order with new financial institutions, updated global rules, a level playing field, and a prosperous China. Quote, we have to level the playing field so that companies and workers can compete in the world, and so that the competition is fair and it's healthy. Okay? At the same time, we had Barack Obama. Remember, this is all within 3 or 4 days, and it's all within the last week. We had Barack Obama giving an address. And in the message, this is when he was presenting his budget. He said, I paraphrase, please watch the video. He wants to see 4-year-old children in the United States enrolled in public schools. He said, I'm paraphrasing, that America needs to start evolving and enrolling 4-year-olds to make sure the children are, quote, better prepared for the demands of the global economy, end quote, and to help parents save on, quote, child care costs, unquote. Quote, The United States needs to equip our citizens with the skills and training. And that has to start at the earliest possible age. End quote. Too few American 4-year-olds are enrolled in school. Quote, but today, fewer than 3 in 10 4-year-olds are enrolled in a high-quality preschool program. And the high cost of private preschool puts too much of a financial burden on middle-class families, end quote. So he wants your 4-year-old to go to a government preschool. I think that's all kind of rather interesting. I mean, this is my opinion. This is not fact. I think it's all kind of interesting that you had those 3 people all within 1 week saying what I just told you, all of which you can Google up. In fact, I think it's chilling. Also, you folks can look it up. Hillary Clinton wrote a book, It Takes a Village. It also talks about the collective raising your children, not you. Look it up. And let me tell you about one other person whose name you'll recognize in history, fairly recent history. His name was Adolf Hitler. Don't groan out there, oh, there's that Hitler comparison. No, I'm just giving you facts, folks. Here's what Hitler said. I'm just going to give you a quote. When an opponent declares, I will not come over to your side. This was a speech, November 6, 1933, by Adolf Hitler. Quote, I calmly say, your child belongs to us already. What are you? You will pass on. Your descendants, however, now stand in the new camp. In a short time, they will know nothing else but the new community. In 1937, he said, quote, this new Reich will give its youth to no one, but it will itself take youth and give to youth its own education and its own upbringing. End quote. Adolf Hitler, may I remind you, was a socialist. The first thing he put in, by the way, when he came into power in 1933-34 was health care. The second thing was gun control. Look it up. Let's go to our next segment, shall we? Let's revisit our Department of Homeland Security. Their purchase of 2 billion rounds of ammunition, 400 to 600 million of those rounds hollow point, which are not used for target practice or training. They're used for one thing, to kill or maim. Their purchase of 2,707 ICED light tanks. Excuse me, I did get an email correcting me on that with a source that was different than mine, and they aren't light tanks. They are armored vehicles. In fact, back from the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. In fact, they're so heavily armored that they were used to clear minefields and IEDs. And they're also armed. So, they're not tanks, they're just heavily armored vehicles. 2,707 of them. All right, so there's 14 congressmen, and they are finally kind of catching on. And Senator Coburn, who I love, Senator Coburn has sent a letter to the DHS asking what the hell is going on. These 14 congressmen are now kind of on it. The DHS has given them some documents. Unfortunately, they're all redacted. Imagine that. They have a $1.5 million contract with Remington Arms. All the facts and figures are redacted. It's for supplying 7,000 quote-unquote assault rifles. You know, the ones that they don't want you to have. It's a no-bid contract. They've also admitted to placing large orders for 223.62 and 223.64 grain ammo, all of which are to be used for rifles and armaments similar to the new ones that they're purchasing. And by the way, the rifles that they purchase are fully automatic, not like the ones you can buy, which are semi-automatic. Anyway, they have these redacted documents which they furnished in response to these insistent letters. And the representative, by the way, who's kind of leading the charge over on the House side is Tim Huelskamp. He's a Republican from Kansas. DHS first said, no, we didn't do that. And then they said, oh, okay, we did that, but we didn't buy that much. And then they said, well, okay, we bought that much, but it's all for training. So the story has been, how do they call that word? Evolving. So I'll ask you guys a question to ask yourselves. Can we believe the government when it comes to what's going on here with these vehicles, which, by the way, they've answered no questions on, or what's now come to light, hundreds of bulletproof checkpoint stations? Please Google it up. Been no answer on that. There's been no answer on the 7,000 fully automatic assault rifles. And the numbers I just gave you are their numbers, and they don't seem to add up within the text of their own report. So, can we believe them? And that brings us to more gun control. They're going to be taxing things, folks. They're going to tax your ammunition. They're going to tax your guns. By the way, Florida just issued a report. Gun violence is down in Florida. Concealed permits is up. Check it out. Another report, 70,291,049 background checks for gun purchase under Obama, almost double George Bush. And by the way, that's just in Obama's first 4 years. I don't think that gun control thing's working too good. Confiscation. New York is confiscating weapons and medical records are being shared illegally, a violation of HIPAA. And contrary to what everybody told you, this is not about, we haven't even thought about confiscation. We're all in favor of the Second Amendment. Google it up. You can listen to the president say it himself. And we have taxes now arising in 4 or 5 states on ammo, guns, $50 a gun, $10 a box of ammo, Maryland, a whole bunch of other places. We have Connecticut threatening arrest to a military vet who called in to ask information about the law there. We have New York offering $500 to snitches to report people who have guns. We have the new bill in Congress which puts you in jail for 5 years if you lose your gun and don't report it within 24 hours. Cook County in Chicago, wow, they've done well, right? #1 murder capital in the world. They're going to tighten down those gun laws that are working so good. $25 tax on gun purchases. Yep, terrific. And we have the California General Assembly, 5-cent tax to every bullet. We have Nevada, $25 tax on gun sales. Massachusetts, 25% sales tax on ammunition and firearms. Maryland, $25 for handgun licenses and a 50% tax on ammunition. You kind of get the background here, guys? This is all in the last 30 days, those of you who were complaining about the timeline. And then we have a report that comes out of DHS. Imagine that. DHS has now labeled Christian evangelists as one of the top terror risks and security threats in the United States, above Al-Qaeda and like terrorist organizations. You don't believe me? Google it up. Google up Defense Department classifies Catholics, evangelicals as extremists. Please, Google it up. It's actually being taught at military training. The Colorado State Patrol went after a sheriff who alleges the same thing in police training right there in Colorado. We're right back to that Colorado thing again, guys. And most of this has been stirred up by the Center, the Southern Law and Poverty Center. Boy, that's a left-wing outfit. They're also the ones who got the government and DHS to classify Tea Party people, conservatives, and you know who's way high on the non-evangelical, non-religious terrorist list? Returning veterans. And did you know that DHS, along with states, are beginning to deny veterans the right to own or purchase firearms? Let's go back to this Christian thing for just a moment. There was a war game scenario at Fort Leavenworth that identified Christian groups and evangelical groups as being the potential threats. A 2009 Department of Homeland Security memorandum identified future threats to national security coming from evangelicals and pro-life groups. A West Point study released by the U.S. Military Academy's Combating Terrorism Center that linked pro-lifers to terrorism. Bibles were barred at Walter Reid Army Medical Center, a decision that was later rescinded. Christian crosses and a steeple were removed from a chapel in Afghanistan because the military said the icons disrespected other religions. I can go on and on. Pretty serious. There are letters going out to veterans which basically say that because of your mental or physical disability, we, without judicial right, in violation of your Fifth Amendment, I'm adding that, folks, the right to due process, have determined that you have to give up the firearms you have and that you can never purchase a firearm again. I'm not making this up. Hundreds and thousands of letters are going out to the veterans who gave their lives, gave their limbs to defend this country and the Constitution, and they are now being deprived of their constitutional rights. For our safety, let me go back to the original question I asked at the beginning of the show. Can you believe your government? Let's go to the economy. Zuckerman, no less the chief of U.S. News and World Report, I would say kind of a mainstream deal. He calls this is no longer the Great Recession, this is the Grand Illusion. He talks about jobs, he talks about many of the things I've talked about in previous shows, which, by the way, are the ones that are apropos or set below last week's show. You should listen to them. They'll give you details and background. Now, in the meantime, during our sequester here and all our financial woes, the Senate voted on party line that illegal aliens, let's be PC, undocumented workers, that illegal aliens were entitled to Obamacare. Straight Democratic vote, right down the line. Oh, by the way, Obamacare is now $3 billion over just on the administrative implementation for this month. Oh, by the way, there was a report that came out, nothing less than the New York Federal Reserve, that said, quote, this is hurting our economy and undermines graduates and destroys the job market. Look it up. Google it. The New York Federal Reserve. And it's on student loan debt, which has gone up 300% in the last 8 years. Most of that since Mr. Obama took office. Please, Google it up. You'll really like this one because, we have a lot of jobs and we can trust the Russians. Obama overrides Congress to buy $690 million worth of Russian choppers for the Afghan Air Force. The company that's getting the contract, a Russian company, a no-bid contract, $700 million at a time that we're cutting our own defense people, who's going to use that contract, folks, it's right here in the article, for research and development to develop weapons which our troops may have to face sometime in the future, in a Russian or other adversary. The company's name is Rosoboronexport. By the way, they weren't allowed to work with us because they were doing business with Iran against our sanctions, and they're supplying weapons to Syria. Don't believe it? Look it up. You can look up Obama overrides Congress to buy $690 million worth of Russian choppers for Afghan Air Force. The article is by Daniel Greenfield. It's in the Point. Oh, and by the way, did you know that, and nobody knew this till just a couple months ago, did you know Mexico is advertising United States food stamp programs so that Mexicans can get better nourished by coming across the border? I'm not making this up. And by the way, the bill to kill that died in committee. 12-10 vote, 12 Democrats against 10 Republicans. So the Mexican government at 50 consulates is advertising food stamps from your pocket for Mexicans who have not even yet crossed the border. Oh, and FHA may need a $943 million, that's almost $1 billion, taxpayer bailout. And I'm sure you all heard that the White House came out just the week before last and said we need to do more subprime mortgages, we need more people in houses. Same thing that led to the last bust. And then last but not least, we have an article here by Jim Rogers, who's a great economist, who reminds us that in Barack Obama's budget that he just proposed, you can look it up online, it's the first assault on 401ks and IRAs. Just like everything else starts, it's only on those rich guys. Guess who's next? This is Reid Lance Rosenthal on the right side. Think about it. We'll talk to you next Saturday.
For more information about Reid and his work, please go to ontherightsideradio.com. There you can also click to purchase the first 2 volumes of his #1 best-selling historical Western series, Threads West, An American Saga, and Maps of Fate. And now the first volume of his new nonfiction series, Land for Love and Money, is available everywhere, or go to landforloveandmoney.com. That's Land for Love and Money. We'd also like to remind you that if you've missed any shows, you can go to the show archives on Reid's ontherightsideradio.com webpage. We look forward to seeing you again next week for another episode of Reid Lance Rosenthal on the Right Side.